My purpose today is to kind of talk through what would it look like if we were more strategic about our own development or the development of our teams and our broader organization. And I wanted to introduce six patterns, of that I think they're worth thinking about and addressing. And maybe some of these you are well versed in and it's no issue. And some of them might provide a light bulb moment for you to think about what you might do. I love alliteration. So they all start with C, and I think they work, but you can tell me in the comments if they don't. So the first thing is lack of continuity. Second, lack of coherence. Third, lack of collaboration. Fourth, lack of connection. 5, lack of confidence. And 6, lack of contemplation. And these are framed negatively, I admit, but part of it is just to say, what do we do to address these absences or this lack in our own development and in the development of the people that we work with? So what I'm hoping to do is take each of these, talk through what does it mean, and then provide some solutions. And like I've said, if you want to throw in a question or a comment, Amy's looking forward to interrupting me. So let's jump in. On the continuity part, so continuity here, we're talking about like a consistent, unbroken commitment to professional development. That's what continuity is about and what it means. And the problem is when we take a scattershot approach, or we take an opportunistic approach or a reactive approach, what we end up with is no continuity. And so we aren't consistently looking to improve. And that leads to skill gaps. So that leads to situations where we don't know what we don't know. And so we have these blind spots, and then we have no plan to fill those gaps. And so what we're going to do is look through the pattern is lack of continuity, which leads to a problem of skill gaps. So what do we do about it? And in this case, our plan is to start defining success. So I want you to step back and just ask yourself, in my organization, do I understand what a successful leader looks like? What does a good leader do in your context? And not only that, what are they expected to know to be successful? So how can you define that North Star, right? It's hard to develop a plan for development that's satisfies continuity if we don't really know where we're headed. And so at the bottom right of this slide, you'll see a personal learning plan. And so what I wanted to do was try to provide an example. And these examples typically come from the LEAD program. So if you found yourself as a student in LEAD, you would then know, okay, this is why we have a personal learning plan. And so what we ask students to do, for instance, is spend a lot of time thinking through their values, their personal vision, what do they hope to learn? Because LEAD is an adult learning program. We're not telling you, hey, this is what you're going to come out with. We're asking you to define your learning for yourself, like a basic, adult learning principle. You define it, and we're going to help you get there. But until you define it, you're not really sure what skills you need to learn. Okay, so that's our first pattern, lack of continuity. And you can be reflecting on your own development. Do you have a lack of continuity in your career? Second pattern is the lack of coherence. And so coherence here means, a logical or internal consistency. So that's our pattern. What do we do about it? Or where does it lead, actually? What's the problem that it produces? So when we grab learning from every corner, we inevitably find conflicting opinions. And we all know this as sort of people who work in the information space and do research, but you can read a great leadership book that tells you to do one thing, and then tomorrow you can read another leadership book that tells you to do something totally different. And so what do we make of that? How do we make sense of these differing opinions, these conflicting experts, all of that? So the problem we end up with is sort of a confused reasoning about how do I go forward? What makes sense? How do I take my new information and add it to what I already know? So one of the plans, or one approach, a solution, is to find a broader framework. Find something that works, that helps you plug in new information into a bigger picture. In the previous slide, we talked about your vision and values. So as a leader, as a developing professional, knowing those things is one way to start your framework, what's consistent internally with you and coherent internally with your values. But also you might want to look at something bigger. So in LEAD, we use the 5 managerial mindsets, which is the foundation for a couple of other major international MBA programs. But the concept being like, there's kind of 5 lenses through which you can look at any given situation. And through your lens as a leader, you can reflect on yourself, or you can reflect on your organization, or you can reflect on the change that's taking place. So these are the sorts of things that then we provide our anchor or our framework for the learning. And by doing that, the new information that we have then gets kind of slotted into the right spots, gets slotted in. And so it isn't the only framework out there, nor am I suggesting that this is the one you need for your context. My suggestion only is that you think through what is a bigger picture concept that allows you to develop some internal coherence to how you think about leadership and management. So that's your challenge for that one. Third lack, the lack of collaboration. So we all know what collaboration is, but it's more than just being together. It's actually working together. So more shoulder to shoulder, less face to face. All right. So it's collaboration that way. That's our pattern. When we don't have that, understandably, it leads to isolation and loneliness. So one of the first things you hear from new leaders is like, whoa, now I feel alone, right? Nobody really understands this role. In fact, I didn't understand this role before I took it. And now I took it and I'm not sure I want it, right? And maybe that's your experience. It was certainly my experience when I started as a manager. So that problem of isolation and loneliness requires us to think about how, or who, more appropriately, who is facing the challenges that we're facing. How can we bring everyone together and join together? So your solution, or a solution in this case, is to gather a cohort. So if you're listening and you're reflecting on some of this, just ask yourself, if I had a managerial challenge right now, who would I talk to? Who would I pick up the phone and call? I've mentioned Rebecca a few times. Rebecca and I talk multiple times a week. She's definitely one of the first people I would call if I didn't understand something, or I was feeling like I just need to bounce an idea off of someone. Who's your cohort? In LEAD, the whole program is designed as a cohort learning model. So we want people to come together. We want them to build a better support network. We know leadership is lonely. And so by bringing those folks together who are at the same space in their career, they build a cohort. And then we layer in some extra expertise and some more experienced leaders to add the right questions that help that cohort grow. So lack of collaboration can be solved if we are more intentional about who we bring around us. Fourth one, just checking my time here, lack of connection. So connection here is not like collaboration. I'm not talking people to people. I'm talking about connection of theory to practice. So, one of the problems is like, we love learning a thing. And in the session before, I was teaching about the double design model for new product development. That's a fine theory. It feels a lot different in practice. So that's the lack we're talking about here, lack of connection. So what are you learning right now that you can apply to a project? When you're missing connection, you miss application. And when you miss application, the learning doesn't stick. So what you want to be able to do is apply your learning to something as quickly as possible. Your main task is to then take whatever I'm hearing and learning and shorten the distance between when I heard it to when I'm trying it. So that's one of the, the life hacks or leadership hacks, if you will. How can you shorten that distance? And one of the ways we do that in LEAD is we take, all students have to do a work-related project. They don't have to complete the project in the program, but we teach them concepts and then they figure out, how could I apply this in my context, right? If we're talking about project management and they've never done a project charter, that's a great starting point for your work project. If they have a challenging conversation with a stakeholder and we do a thing about crucial conversations, fantastic. How can you apply that in your next conversation with your stakeholder? So we want to make sure that we're not just talking about a thing, but that they are actually able to put that into practice. So that's the fourth one. Fifth one, which we do see a lot, especially with newer managers, is a lack of confidence, right? And we all know that. We've all felt that. Here I'm talking about, that self-confidence piece in your own abilities. And, the problem that occurs is it's almost like low motivation, that I'm worried, or I have that imposter syndrome raging. I'm afraid to take that risk. I'm afraid to hold that meeting. I'm afraid to try that new activity. And so that low motivation really robs the confidence and the excitement about moving forward. So if you're sitting here and you're newer, like, think about that. What are your natural abilities? Well, how might you use your strengths to assist others, whether they're on your team or not, right? What are people coming to you for because you know things? And then in your plan, find your strengths. If you're not sure, go do some sort of assessment. Find out what you might do to learn more about yourself and really get to know that person that's looking back in the mirror, right? One of the tools we use at LEAD, again, just using LEAD as the example, is all students after their first class run through a DISC assessment. And the DISC assessment measures kind of their engagement and motivation and gives them a report that tells them about how they prefer to work. What are their motivators? What are their stressors? It's pretty accurate, but it's not designed to be an assessment. It's really an indicator and a starting point for conversation and reflection. So what we do is ask them then to think about, what does this mean? Does this make sense in your workplace, in your relationships with others? You can be a leader from any one of the styles that DISC might provide, but how and what does leadership look like then? So getting that self-awareness is one of the very first things we have students do in LEAD. Last lack, and that's the lack of contemplation. I think this has become one of the biggest challenges. And here I'm meaning contemplation as time set aside for reflection, ultimately. That are we doing the thinking we need to do? Our world is full of distractions, opportunities for interruption. And as a result, we rush on to the next thing and we don't solidify the learning. And so that's the pattern. And then the problem is it creates low self-awareness, that we haven't stopped to think about our own feelings about something. We haven't stopped to ask others for their perspective. And that low self-awareness perpetuates future problems because we don't learn what's working and what's not. So the obvious plan, and very difficult one to do for many leaders, is to just slow down and reflect, think through what's happened in the day. What do I do about it? And so one of the challenges we ask people to do is we build a lot of reflection time into LEAD. Every online class ends with a question or two or a prompt. We give them a reflection journal and we tell them, actually write it down by hand. Don't type it. You're probably way faster at typing it, but it's not about getting it done. It's about slowing down to think. And when you write it with your hands and you spend the space thinking, it actually sticks better. And so, one of the things you might think about is like, what are you noticing each day when you go to work? What is your energy level like? How motivated are you to face the tasks that you have to face, right? And how might you introduce more opportunities for reflection?